to lead winning sales teams. Now, before we get started, just two very quick housekeeping items. We're going to save some time at the end for Q&A. It'll be quick, so feel free to submit your questions as we go along using either the chat or Q&A functions. Also, we are going to be recording today's session, and we'll be sure to send that recording to you after today and a copy of the slides as well. Okay, so let's get started. First, I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Sarah Doherty. Sarah is our Marketing Operations Manager, and she's going to be producing today's webinar. I'm also pleased to introduce our hosts, Chris Tenay, who is our Chief Product Officer, and Shannon Holmes, our VP and Head of Sales for Canada. We begin with Chris. Chris, over to you.
Hey, thank you so much, Andrea. So we have a lot to cover today and 30 minutes to do it. So let's look at the agenda. We're going to start off by talking about our point of view on the capabilities of world-class sales managers. There's a lot that's being asked of sales managers. We'll share a little bit about how we see that landscape. Then we'll talk about some very specific best practices that you can use to start building sales management skills across a range of areas. Then we'll start to wrap up by talking a little bit about how sales management connects to the rest of the sales capabilities in what we call the connected selling curriculum, so you can build a continuum of learning across your organization. And finally, we'll wrap up, as Andrea mentioned, with some Q&A. There's a lot to get to, so let's jump in. Sales leaders and sales managers have a ton on their plates. That is not news to any of us. They're called upon to serve as sales coaches to their teams, but increasingly, the best sales managers do more than that. We believe at Richardson Sales Performance that they lean into several key areas that help them become more effective. First of all, they lean into creating a deliberate sales culture, and they do that and pursue it actively with some best practices. Second, they think about how to best lead an increasingly diverse team of salespeople. We'll talk about what that diversity means and some strategies and techniques that managers can use to equip themselves more effectively to lead those teams. And of course, sales managers are outcome focused. They set up the processes and cadences needed in your organization to drive towards sales performance goals that you have set for your teams. At Richardson Sales Performance, we've been spending a lot of time, several years in fact, doing research and distilling down several key capabilities that sales managers need in order to be world-class in each of these areas. We're going to share some of these best practices in just a minute, but before we dive in, I'd like you to go to your chat window at the bottom of your screen and just share in chat which of these high-level areas feel like the biggest opportunity for your team. Is it coaching, leading salespeople, creating sales culture, or driving sales performance? Just be curious to see in the chat before we get started where your interests for this conversation lie. I saw reviewing pipeline, culture has come up twice, a couple around coaching. Good. Coaching, excellent. Okay, a broad mix. I'm really glad to see that because we're going to touch on each of these. And as we go through, use the Q&A function, and we will come back to some of your specific questions as we go through. So let's dive in with coaching, since several of you talked about coaching as a critical area of focus. We believe at Richardson Sales Performance that coaching is critical. It is the heart of developing really talented sales managers. And we also believe that every coaching interaction that your managers have with your sellers is an opportunity to model the skills and behaviors you want to see your sales teams using when they engage with your customers. So it's not only a coaching opportunity, but it's a modeling opportunity as well. Great coaching really helps you build the culture and the behaviors that you want to see organization-wide. We know that your sales managers are your force multipliers, and the research shows this to be true as well. Josh Berson's research, which you see on the screen now, demonstrates that effective coaching is the best way for sales managers to have an impact on their performance. In fact, he estimates that coaching has a bigger impact by a factor of 2 on sales performance compared to pay for performance or other performance assessments. So we know that coaching is important. The question then becomes, why aren't we better at it? Or worse, why don't sales managers do it at all? And there are a couple of things that you can focus on as you think about how to equip your managers to be more effective coaches that can really help them along in that journey. Great coaching starts with understanding genuinely and authentically what is happening in the mind of the person who's being coached. On the left-hand side of your screen, you see self-determination theory. At Richardson Sales Performance, we anchor most of what we do in behavioral science and neuroscience so that we can better equip sellers and managers to understand what's happening in the minds of their customers and of the people that they're leading. Self-determination theory helps us understand that our brains are actually wired around three critical psychological needs. A need to feel autonomous. So we need to feel like we're independent individuals and adults. A need to feel competent, like we're smart and good at what we do. And a need for relatedness or connectedness to something bigger than ourselves. That might be a mission, a cause, it may be the colleagues and the peers that we work with. We all have these needs to different degrees, but it's the coaches who really understand these who are able to reduce defensiveness and build trust with their sellers. So we work with managers to develop an understanding of how they can do that, reduce trust and reduce defensiveness, build trust, and ultimately drive results. The trap that many managers fall into when they do coach is, where are they focusing their time? Are they focusing it on the right activities? And there are actually three core reasons to coach. The first is help people learn new skills. The second core reason to coach is to adjust and refine behaviors. And the third area to coach is to improve sales results. And I think if we just click through, yep, there we go. So accelerate learning, affect behavior change, and improve sales results. Where do you think most sales managers want to focus their time? It's a rhetorical question. Of course, they want to focus on improving sales results. But here's the reality. The reality is it's actually a combination of increasing learning that leads to affecting behavior change. And it's only once people's behaviors change that they're able to have an impact on the ultimate sales results that we're looking for. So the best coaching actually takes an agile approach to helping managers identify both tuning into the seller that they're coaching and identify the right area to focus their time on in order to get the behavior change they're looking for and lead to improved results. So we have an approach which we call sprint coaching that helps managers develop these skills in an agile and flexible way and lead ultimately to improved business outcomes on the other end. But coaching alone is not enough, as we talked about before. Too often, we find it's where the manager learning journey ends. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Shannon, to talk a little bit about the manager's role in building and driving sales culture. Shannon?
Great, thanks, Chris. And you might be asking yourself, what do we mean by sales culture? And so I want us to think about it as the atmosphere created by how we drive accountability and how we engage with our teams. And spoiler alert, it turns out that the best organizations have a plan for how they do this and how they do it deliberately. So let's take a look at these now. So the first capability that's critically important to driving salesperson accountability being an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. So our success as managers depends largely on our ability to hold our salespeople accountable to their commitments, to their actions, activities, results. And we all know this is easier said than done. Chris just mentioned a trap, but we can also fall into the trap of thinking that more activity leads to better results, but it's more complex than that. The reality is that there's high value activity and lower value activity. Getting behind the numbers to understand who they're spending time with, the actions they're focused on, that can help us get more effective metrics in place. And we know what gets measured gets done. And so that's what this is really about. Once you've identified what your metrics are, you can use those as a foundation for a plan to strengthen your sales culture. So that involves working backwards from your metrics to set clear expectations, clarify rewards and recognition, define development opportunities so you continue to help your team grow, and making sure that your team has the tools and systems to be effective and they don't become distractions or barriers. And what we know is that the most successful client organizations we work with, they set aside time annually to revisit the metrics that they're driving towards, and they reverse engineer it to deliberately strengthen their culture. They also take this as an opportunity to share with their salespeople what they're going to be doing, what the focus is, getting buy-in, and using it as a touchstone throughout the year to make sure that focus is remaining and we're getting traction. Last capability around sales culture is thinking about the meetings that you run with your sales team and the value that they add. But before we talk about that, I want to ask you all a question. So I want you to reflect on your current sales team meetings. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how valuable would your salespeople rate them today? So 1 being waste of time, 5 to 7 being they're fine, and 8 to 10 being highly valuable. So you'll see that Sarah launched it in the poll. Go ahead and answer that. And while they're working on that, Chris, I'm curious, what have you heard in your interactions with sales teams?
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Yeah, we've got about 40 people who have responded so far. And I think you'll be interested to see what the results are. We tend to find somewhere in the 5 to 7 range. They're okay. Maybe they're valuable. Sales meetings are valuable for a few people who are in them, but not for everyone.
Right.
We don't like to see a lot of 1 to 4s.
Right. Yeah, and same over here. We see a lot in the middle. So let's talk about why that matters. So sales team meetings are one of the key tools that we have as leaders to influence the culture on our team. And if we just go to the next slide. Coming out of this webinar, I just asked you a question. I would encourage you all to ask your sales team the same question that you just answered. And if you get scores below an 8 out of 10, ask yourself seriously, could these meetings maybe just be an email? Because the real trouble here is that we think about meetings as an hour of time. So we don't think about the fact that we have 8 salespeople, we have ourselves, so that's 9 people, all for an hour, which actually equals 9 hours invested in them. So you can see why we want to make sure that these are highly valuable. So to do that, there's 5 key practices to making sure that you increase the value or you have more people saying 8 or higher out of 10. I'm going to share 2 of my favorites today that I use often. First one is around including an activity where you build confidence and capability. So you help them get better in their role, which inevitably leads hopefully to more success. Second is recognizing and rewarding the behaviors and results that you want to see more of. And I think we can all say that no one loves a competition more than salespeople. So that doesn't hurt at all. I'm going to hand it back over to Chris to talk a little bit about how you lead the people on your team, and then I'll be back with you in a bit.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. So Shannon talked about large sales team meetings. I want to talk about how you start to lead the individual members of your team, your salespeople. One of the things that continues to evolve in sales management is the makeup of your team. Millennials now comprise the majority of the workforce, and expectations of managers when it comes to people leadership continue to evolve. There are a couple of key things that sales managers really need to invest in developing in order to be effective people leaders these days. The first is how you think about leading really world-class one-on-ones. We talk to sales managers all the time about one-on-ones. And of course, everybody says, oh yeah, of course I do one-on-ones. I totally know how to do that. But what we're talking about here is different than talking to sellers one-on-one. And nobody actually sits down and teaches us what good looks like here. Research shows that millennials and Gen Z in particular are motivated by managers that tune into them as a complete person. And this means going beyond the tactical business conversations that we get really good at in sales management. The most effective sales managers really structure their one-on-ones to address both the business components. So think about pipeline reviews and deal reviews and opportunity review conversations or strategy conversations, but also make sure to use time in that one-on-one conversation to talk about personal drivers, like to what extent am I feeling challenged in my role? Am I stressed, or am I in the stretch zone or the panic zone in my role? That's going to diminish my performance. Am I proud of my performance, or would I be more proud of my performance if I was turning in a different result? Just like Shannon shared with us in sales culture, the best managers take a few minutes before one-on-one meetings every time to prepare in advance and treat each one-on-one as an opportunity to be deliberate about celebrating success and setting shared expectations for the future. So that all sounds good. Setting clear shared expectations, it's great in theory, but it doesn't always go to plan, right? What happens when you've shared expectations a few times and nothing is changing? We call this the broken record conversation, or having to have a vital conversation. This is when you sound like a broken record. Chris, why aren't you filling out the CRM? Why aren't you filling out the CRM? Why aren't you filling out the CRM? We never have to have that conversation, right? These vital conversations are different than coaching, and they're different from performance management conversations. And I think potentially they're the hardest conversation for a manager to learn how to have. This is a for real conversation where you need to sit down and understand what are the roadblocks to change here, and how can we put those on the table in a way that is trusting and get past those roadblocks towards better performance. Now, it's important to note that these are not typically used when a seller's job is at risk. That should be a performance management conversation, and it's an important one to get good at having. But this is something that's usually impacting the seller's ability to be successful, and it might be things like, how do they engage with other team members, or my CRM example, right? So getting really good at mastering these conversations, helps build directness in the manager relationship. It is reinforced by great coaching, and it's reinforced by the kind of one-on-ones you're having. So you start to see how all of these capabilities start to play together to really equip managers to be effective. So you have good one-on-ones, you can have the hard conversations. Now, how do you motivate people to reach their full potential? In sales, we often assume that it's money that motivates salespeople. And, to be fair, in some cases, that's true. Salespeople like to make more money, but it's not always the full picture. There are actually several motivators that motivate all professionals, but sellers in particular. And those are achievement. So some people are actually motivated just by the idea of achieving a goal. You heard Shannon talk before about who's more competitive than salespeople. Nobody. We love a leaderboard. We love a sales prize. We love recognition. All of that is an important motivator, which sometimes is related to money, but sometimes it's not. Power. This is a really interesting one because not all salespeople lead the sales organization, right? But think back to self-determination theory and our need to feel competent and autonomous. Some salespeople are particularly motivated by the feeling that they are an expert in their field, or they have a particular degree of competence or power. And that's an important motivator to understand and be able to tap into. And the third is affiliation. You think back to self-determination theory, that idea of relatedness. This is a motivator where people are motivated by the relationships that they cultivate. That could be client relationships, that could be relationships with other team members, it could be relationships with their manager directly. Understanding the motivator that's at play with the person that you're managing helps you then to start build a deliberate plan for how you manage that individual. And it can be very, very powerful. So what does that plan look like? We talked about, understanding the motivators. We also talked about the increasing diversity in the workplace. I think now more than ever, managers have to be tuned in to the different people on their team and think about different approaches for managing them as individuals in a way that's authentic. There are a couple of things that you can do to help you build this capability on your team. Really effective managers tune into 4 key areas. The head, knowing who their people are and how they react to different situations, helps managers communicate and engage with them in a way that resonates. The heart is about understanding what's most important to that individual and helping managers build relationships and a common understanding with them. The hands, that's about the skills, paying attention to strengths and areas of opportunity so that managers can align the support and coaching that's needed for each individual in order to drive the right behaviors. And the feet, that's the motivators that we were just talking about before, knowing what motivates your individual team member, and that equips managers to be able to pull the right levers to drive behavior and ultimately motivate success. Research from the Catalyst Group supports this approach. 76% of employees surveyed who work with empathetic leaders report that they feel more engaged at work. And engagement, we know, is key, not only to seller retention, but also to sales success as well. So these capabilities together help you build a management plan for individuals that meets them where they are, and it helps you develop great people leaders within your management organization. I'm going to hand it back to Shannon to talk about the last area of capability, and that is driving sales performance. Shannon?
Great. So we've talked about culture, we've talked about leading our people. Let's talk about how we drive to the ultimate lagging indicator, which is performance. So there are 3 capabilities that help managers get clear about what's happening within their teams and what's not. So I'm going to start off and we're going to do another chat. So if you go into the chat, I'm going to show you 3 different pipelines. And what I want you to put in the chat is what you think is happening behind the scenes to create it. So let's put the first one up. So what do you think is causing this shape? Chris, no distracting our participants.
Here we go.
Scared to ask for the business, struggles closing deals, lack of follow-up. Yep, not able to close. Yeah, so what we see here is lots of new prospects, lots of opportunities, but they aren't closing a lot. So it could be some of the things that we put in there. It could be that they haven't accurately identified pain or power. There could be a misalignment around timing, urgency, solution, budget. So there's something that's causing it to stall out at the most important part here. Let's go to the second one. What do you think is going on here?
Hiding. Not enough hunting.
Yep. Yeah.
Not casting a wide enough net. Not enough activity. These are good.
Yeah. Yeah, could be not enough direction.
Yep. Yeah, and just a low overall level of activity.
Yeah, and so we'll come out as a surprise then when we say we call this one a thin pipeline. So overall, just not enough going on at each level. And when we think about what's going on behind the scenes, it could be where they're spending their time. You know, sometimes we have people who are really focused on admin, or they're talking to the people that they know who don't really have a need versus prospecting. Okay, last one. What's going on here? Yeah, great close ratio. What's happening in this last one? Not focused enough. Yeah. Yeah, trouble identifying real projects.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have got it. So lots of conversations, few opportunities, which then of course lead to few closes. So some questions to consider are, who are they meeting with? Is it the right people, the right organizations? What do those conversations sound like? So let's talk a little bit about pipeline management. So the most effective sales managers have a clear understanding of their team's individual pipelines and the reasons behind it. And the tricky thing is you can't just get that full story in CRM. So effective pipeline management requires dialogue and partnership between sales managers and salespeople. And this is a different type of conversation than the one-on-one that Chris was talking about, in the sense that this is really focused on opportunities, both strategic as well as the tactical aspects of it, but is very much focused on deals in play. Dialogue around the pipeline is great, but to really understand what's going on, it's also critical to see sellers in action. And this is what we're talking about when we talk about coaching in the field. So our research tells us that managers are good at attending meetings with their sellers and helping to close deals. And usually that's by talking about next steps, ensuring that they take place, getting involved. What's often missing is clarity on goals and roles beforehand, and using it as an opportunity to develop confidence and skill for the seller. So time and time again, we hear that sellers want feedback, right? and they want to learn so they can be more successful and they can be, achieve like how Chris just talked about. Why don't we use these opportunities to support them with that and help them grow and help them do better in their conversations? And at the same time, we can also learn more about what's really influencing their results by seeing them in action or lack thereof. So this is a great opportunity for that. I'm going to talk about one more capability, and that's around how you create a practice of opportunity reviews that is both objective and informed by data. So at Richardson Sales Performance, we believe strongly in the practice of opportunity scoring. And we actually have a set of opportunity vitals that help sellers track towards the right outcomes and visualize the health of the opportunity for managers. So using these opportunity health scores as part of opportunity review practice really helps move the conversation from I feel this way about the opportunity to I know that we've got areas of strength with this client and areas where we need to focus more time. And so what this does is it helps sellers and managers make more strategic choices about where to go in the pursuit to improve their chances of winning and also be more strategic with their time, which is really important because they're some of our most precious resources in our organizations. So I know we've covered a lot in a short period of time. I'm going to hand it back over to Andrea to wrap us up.
Thanks, Shannon and Chris. We did cover a lot in a short amount of time. Shannon and Chris did an excellent job covering these 11 capabilities that you see here. Now, there's a lot more behind all of them. They were really just scratching the surface to give you a sense of what we mean when we talk about these various capabilities. And those 11 capabilities form part of our managed sales team as part of our connected selling curriculum that you see here. So all of our programs are tied to helping your salespeople create pipeline, win opportunities, grow accounts, but also your important sales managers, helping them to effectively manage their team. And Shannon and Chris covered those 4 green areas you see today. We wanted to make sure that you're aware that if you're interested in giving your sales managers some training and professional development in any one of those areas that were covered today, we have a sales management curriculum that is modular in nature. We can put together program packages for you as well. Sessions typically, VILT sessions typically range from about 2 to 4 hours on any one of those given topics and capabilities that Shannon and Chris talked about. If you're interested in hearing more, below you can see how to get in touch with us at our phone number or at info@richardson.com. And now we've got a quick 2 minutes for some Q&A. We did have one come in, Chris and Shannon, over the Q&A. And if folks have additional questions, please feel free to type them in right now. I just lost it. Kevin's question went away. Chris, do you remember what it was?
Yeah, it's so Kevin asked, performance is ultimately the result of learning, behavior, and following a process. How do you change values so that sellers become more process-oriented as opposed to performance-oriented? Mm-hmm. And it's a great question, first of all. And I think there are 2 things that I would recommend here. One is in terms of, what Shannon was talking about the sales culture. It's about setting the expectation that process is equally as important to performance. And then reinforcing that in everything you do, your communication plans, your one-on-ones, your team meetings, and being super consistent that value is going to be rewarded. It's going to be inspected, it's going to be expected, and it's going to be rewarded. Mm-hmm. The second thing I would comment on here is in how you think about then coaching the individual opportunities. Shannon talked about a data-driven approach to opportunity review. What's critically important is when you get into those opportunity reviews that you don't just pull up the CRM and say, okay, so what do you think about this? What do you feel about this? What's your gut instinct tell you about where we are here? But it sets an expectation that we're going to follow the same process every time we come to an opportunity review. We're going to model it. We're going to use the data to help inform us about where we are with that opportunity. And then we're going to move on to the next opportunity and treat it in the same way. So it elevates process higher. And then celebrates when better adherence to process leads to the kind of expected outcome that we were looking for. Thanks, Chris.
Got a couple more come in. I think we probably have time for one more question. Alexandra said, how do you get old timers? I love the characterization. We know what you mean, Alexandra. How do you get old timers in an organization to adopt new ways of doing things, especially if they're already having a reasonable level of success?
Good question. Shannon, do you want to try that one or do you want me to take it?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing that went to my mind was some of the stuff that you talked about earlier. So we're talking about this from the level of sales managers and their sellers. but can also be sales leaders to their sales managers, and finding out what actually motivates them and what will make the difference and resonate with them. Because value isn't all the same, but they need to see the value. And the only way to do that is really understand what it is that motivates them and tie it to that. What would you add, Chris?
I think it's great. I think the only thing I would add is, the more tenured we are in sales and sales organizations and leadership of any kind, the more we tend to rely on assumptions. And I think the more you can drill underneath what some of those assumptions are and help managers and leaders see that actually, the makeup of their team is changing, expectations are changing, and we got to change with it in order to meet our sellers where they are today. I think it will make your managers and leaders feel more secure and more comfortable, and ultimately lead to some better outcomes.
Thank you, Chris and Shannon. I know we have a couple more questions that came in. Unfortunately, we are at the end of time. Again, please feel free to email us. We'd love to have a chat with you if you have more questions. This is a topic you can tell we're quite passionate about. And as a final closing here, a reminder, we will send out the slides and a copy of the recording today. And just for a little bit of fun, if you're a Spotify listener, we've created some really cool sales Spotify playlists, also some for sales managers. So if you have your phone, you can actually scan that QR code. Again, thank you all on behalf of Shannon, Chris, Sarah, and myself for joining us today. Thanks and have a great day.